Imagine stepping onto the wet plank floor of a sawmill before dawn. In the winter of 1903, somewhere in the rain-soaked timber country of Western Oregon. The air smells like wet wood and coal smoke. Your boots find their place by memory. You've done this 100 times. You reach for the carriage lever, the one that feeds massive logs into the screaming circular saw just 3 feet from where you stand. The floor is slick with sawdust and condensation. The blade is already spinning, invisible in its speed, waiting. A report published by the Oregon Bureau of Labor Statistics in 1904 would later note that sawmill workers faced fatality rates nearly double those of miners. But you don't know that yet. You just know the whistle blew, the steam is up, and the first log is rolling into position. You pull the lever. The carriage lurches forward. And somewhere in the machinery's roar, danger doesn't announce itself. It just waits for the smallest mistake. Before we go any further into this story, if you believe these men deserve to be remembered, that their sacrifice built the world we live in today, hit that subscribe button. But only if you truly mean it. These aren't just statistics. They were fathers, brothers, sons, and their story matters. By the 1890s, the Pacific Northwest had become the timber capital of America. Logging towns exploded into mill towns almost overnight. What had been dense forest one year became a sprawl of bunkhouses, company stores, and massive sawmills the next. The mills sat beside rivers or railroad spurs, positioned to process the endless flow of timber coming down from the mountains. You could hear them before you saw them, the scream of circular saws, the hiss of steam, the rhythmic thunder of logs hitting water. The towns were not really towns. They were company property. You lived in company housing. You bought your food at the company store. You got paid in company scrip, metal tokens, or paper vouchers, good only at that store, where prices ran high and debt ran higher. If you arrived broke, which most men did, you borrowed against your first week's wages just to eat. And once you were in debt, you stayed in debt. The company made sure of it. You slept in bunkhouses that held 30, 40, sometimes 50 men, shoulder to shoulder on wooden bunks, 2 tiers high, with a single wood stove in the center that never quite beat back the damp cold. The smell was a mix of wet wool, tobacco, sweat, and the ever-present scent of fresh-cut timber. You ate fast, you ate heavy. Beans, bread, salt pork, coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in, because in 2 hours, none of it would matter. The whistle would blow, and the mill would come alive. The mill itself was a cathedral of industry. Massive timber frames held up corrugated metal roofs. The main saw, often 5 to 8 feet in diameter, sat at the heart of it all, driven by belt systems connected to a coal-fired steam engine. The blade spun at over 3,000 rotations per minute. When it bit into a log, the shriek was deafening. Men who worked near the saw for years went deaf. Nobody wore ear protection. It did not exist. Around the main saw, the mill sprawled in sections. The log deck, where timber was sorted and positioned. The carriage track, where logs were fed into the blade. The edging stations, where rough lumber was trimmed. The planer, where boards were smoothed. And the stacking yard, where finished lumber was piled 20 feet high. Every station had its own dangers. Every roll had its own way of killing you. You learned which sounds meant danger. The groan of a log binding against the blade. The hiss of a steam line about to rupture. The snap of a belt coming loose from its drive wheel. You learned to watch the old-timers, the ones missing fingers or walking with a limp, because they had survived long enough to know the difference between a close call and a fatal mistake. But the blade was not what killed most men. If you are finding this fascinating or horrifying, Drop a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is incredible to see how far these forgotten histories reach. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button. There is so much more to uncover. The real killing started at the log deck. This was where timber came off the mill pond or the rail cars. Massive, old-growth logs, some of them 6 feet in diameter, weighing several tons. Pond men used pike poles and peaveys, long wooden poles with metal hooks and points to guide the logs into position. The bark was slippery. The logs rolled unpredictably. If you lost your footing, if your pike pole slipped, if the log rolled the wrong way, you went into the water or under the timber. The weight was unforgiving. A report from a Grays Harbor mill in 1900 described a pond man crushed between 2 logs. Death was instantaneous, the report noted. He was 26. He left a wife and 2 children. The company paid the widow $50 and offered her a job in the cookhouse. You gripped your pike pole. You balanced on wet logs. You prayed the bark held. You worked fast because the mill ran on speed. Logs had to keep moving. The saw couldn't sit idle. Idle time was lost money. And lost money meant the foreman was in a mood. And a foreman in a mood meant someone was getting fired, or worse, pushed harder. Once a log was positioned, it rolled onto the carriage, a massive mechanical platform that moved on rails, feeding the log into the saw. The sawyer controlled the carriage, pulling levers that determined how thick each cut would be. The carriage rider stood on the platform itself, riding it back and forth, adjusting the log with a cant hook as it moved toward the spinning blade. It was skilled work. It was loud work. It was work that demanded total concentration while your entire body vibrated from the machinery and the noise hit 120 decibels, loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage in minutes. The danger wasn't just the blade, it was the kickback. Knots in the wood could catch the teeth and whip the log sideways. Binding could send the whole carriage lurching. You learned to read the wood, to watch for twists in the grain, to listen for changes in the saw's pitch. But exhaustion makes you miss things. And mills ran 12-hour, 14-hour, and 16-hour shifts. You got tired. Everyone got tired. The saw screamed. Your hands went numb from the vibration. Sawdust filled the air, thick enough that you could barely see 10 feet. In winter, the cold bit through wet wool. In summer, the heat from the steam engine and the friction of the blade turned the mill into a furnace. You worked, you survived, or you didn't. The filer was the most skilled man in the mill. He was the one who maintained the saw blade, tensioning it, sharpening the teeth, checking for cracks. It was delicate, precise work. A saw blade that big, spinning that fast, under that much stress, was always on the edge of failure. And when a saw blade failed, it didn't just stop, it exploded. Metal shards moving at over 100 miles per hour. No guards, no protection. Men working 10 feet away. In certain mills, in bad years, saw explosions killed or maimed multiple workers in a single incident. The filer himself was often the first to go, standing right there when the blade let go, when the metal fractured from fatigue or a hidden flaw, when physics turned a precision tool into a fragmentation bomb. If you survived the saw, you moved to the finishing floor. Edgermen trimmed rough lumber, trimmers cut boards to length, graders sorted by quality. Every station involved moving wood, and moving wood meant hands near blades, near belts, near machinery that didn't stop. Fingers went first, then hands, then arms. You learned to count your fingers at the end of every shift. It was a dark joke, but it was also survival. You knew men who'd lost a finger and kept working. You knew men who'd lost a hand and were sent away with nothing. Amputation was common enough, that it barely rated a mention in the company ledger. Industrial accident, minor injury, minor because he didn't die. But above all of it, above the saws and the logs and the blades, the real killer was the belt drive system. Massive leather belts, some of them 2 feet wide, ran from the steam engine to every piece of machinery in the mill. They ran overhead, unguarded, turning flywheels and driving saws and planers. They ran fast, they ran constantly. And if your shirt caught, if your sleeve brushed the belt, if you reached up at the wrong moment, you were gone. No warning, just the catch, the pull. The body yanked upward into machinery, moving too fast to stop. Men watched it happen. They watched their co-workers pulled into the belt system, into the gears, into the mechanical void. And then the mill kept running. Because stopping cost money, and money mattered more than men. The belt system didn't care about skill or experience. It didn't care if you were careful. It just waited, and eventually, in a mill where hundreds of men worked in close quarters with unguarded machinery, someone made contact. Someone died, and the logs kept coming. The fire started in the sawdust. Sawdust was everywhere, piled in corners, drifting through the air, coating every surface. It was explosive. Dry wood particles in a confined space, one spark from the steam engine or the saw blade hitting a metal fragment in the wood, and the whole mill could go up. Mill fires were fast. The lumber was dry. The structure was wood. The exits were few. Men had seconds to get out. Some didn't make it. Survivor testimony from a 1905 mill fire in Washington described men trapped on the upper floors, jumping from windows, burning. The mill was destroyed. 16 men died. The company rebuilt within 3 months. Production resumed. No one was held accountable. But fire wasn't even the worst of it. The worst was the grind. The daily, relentless pressure to work faster, cut more, push harder. Mills ran on piece rates. You got paid for what you produced. So you skipped breaks. You ignored pain. You worked through injuries that should have sent you to a doctor, if there had been a doctor, which there usually wasn't. Speed killed more men than inexperience ever did. A man rushing to clear a jam at the saw. A man running across the wet plank floor. A man too exhausted to notice the log rolling toward him. The company wanted production. The foreman demanded it. And you delivered, because if you didn't, someone else would take your job. In the company ledger, deaths were recorded as accidental or operational loss. Compensation, if it came at all, was minimal. $50, $100. Enough to bury a man and maybe feed his family for a month. Then the widow had to find work, often in the same mill, cooking or cleaning for the men who worked beside her husband. The children went into the mill too, as soon as they were old enough to hold a broom or stack lumber. The system didn't just kill men. It consumed families. It fed on desperation and isolation and the simple fact that there was nowhere else to go. The mill owned the town. The mill owned the store. The mill owned you. And when you died, the mill recorded the loss and moved on. Records later showed what everyone already knew. Sawmills in the Pacific Northwest had some of the highest industrial fatality rates in the country. Hundreds of men dead every year, thousands maimed, all to feed America's insatiable demand for lumber. The legacy is still here. The mills are mostly gone now, abandoned, burned, torn down. But the lumber remains. In old houses, you'll find beams cut up from those forests, boards planed in those mills, timber that cost men their lives to produce, the railroad ties that carried trains across the continent, the docks that built the shipping industry. the frames of 1,000 buildings in 100 cities. When you see old wooden beams in a house or weathered planks on a boardwalk, remember where they came from. Remember the men who worked in the cold and the wet and the noise. Remember the ones who lost fingers, hands, limbs. Remember the ones who didn't come home. Remember that every piece of that lumber was paid for in blood and sweat, and the kind of courage that comes from having no other choice. The forest is mostly gone now. The trees that took 500 years to grow were cut down in 50. The mills that processed them ran for a few decades and then closed when the timber ran out. The towns emptied. The machinery rusted. The men who did the work were forgotten. But the lumber is still here, built into the bones of the country, a legacy written in wood and blood. What do you think? Was the cost worth it, or could we have done better? Should we have protected these workers more? Should their names be remembered alongside the buildings they made possible? Share your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, if you think these men deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button one more time. Their legacy depends on people like you keeping their memory alive.